Right, back to the Middle East now, and Hamas and Israel have agreed to exchange prisoners for hostages and will stop the fighting in Gaza to allow those releases to take place. U.S. officials say that some Americans being held by Hamas will be freed as part of this deal. Our Lilia Luciano has the reaction from Tel Aviv. Lilia, good morning.
Good morning to you, Anne-Marie. Certainly, there is a great deal of hope. There is optimism, but it is cautious. And look, all parties have made it very clear that this is not peace. This is not even a step towards peace. There is an intention for the war to continue after this ceasefire. But at least at this point, some women and children will get to go home, and desperately needed aid will get into Gaza. There's cautious optimism among the surviving families of the hostages taken in the terror attacks of October 7th.
Any person will be released is good, is important. Eventually we need them all. But if it's had to be slice by slice, so be it.
In the deal brokered by the U.S., Egypt and Qatar, an initial 4-day ceasefire, and Hamas must release 50 hostages, all women and children, in exchange for 150 Palestinian women and children detained by Israel. In Gaza, where the future has been flattened for the 1.7 million now internally displaced, according to the UN, the temporary truce will allow hundreds of humanitarian aid trucks in. But the ceasefire has not yet begun. Just yesterday, some 50 people, an overwhelming majority of them children, were killed in this building in southern Gaza. 14-year-old Maria was one of just 2 survivors. And the initial 50 Israeli hostages to be released will not include adult men, like Lior and Noam Perry's 80-year-old father, Chaim, taken from the Nir Oz kibbutz.
I'm just thinking about taking someone 80 years old from his house in his pajamas, without his glasses and even without sandals.
Though they trust they will see him again, Lior still can't understand or accept how this could have happened. Who do you blame?
The only one I can blame, my government. They're in charge of keeping us safe. My government was supposed to take care of the people here, and they didn't.
Like so many families of the hostages, Lior and Noam are so concerned about how their father is doing. He's 80 years old, although they told me he is very strong. He was able to push off one of the first attackers, or the first attacker who tried to come in. He was able to save his wife, who was hiding. Others came after, and there was one moment there, Anne-Marie, that they were explaining to me how they realized he did not have his shoes is because they found one of his flip-flops, one of his sandals that he always wore, that he's had for many years. So they clearly knew that he was wearing those, and they found one there in the house. 80 years old, they're thinking, how is he doing all these 47 days in? But we've learned from Israeli sources that part of the deal is that the Red Cross is going to be able to go in and see some of the hostages that are not being released immediately and provide medical attention. But of course, the caveat is the hostages that have been identified, the hostages that are still alive.
That's excellent. I know that some of the family members were asking for at least that. But Lilia, the New York Times has a bit of sort of a TikTok of these ongoing negotiations. And when you read their reporting, what you see is that there were times earlier on when the two sides were at a near deal where the hostages could have been released. I'm really curious about the reaction within Israel. How do people feel about this deal? I'm sure they're appreciative. Do they think maybe it could have happened earlier?
Oh, absolutely. Without question. One of the things that I've been hearing from families of the hostages, friends of the hostages, children and parents of the hostages is, look, it's very clear to us that our government, and as you heard from Lior, has not prioritized the release of the hostages. It has prioritized eradicating Hamas. And if your goal, and that's what they were telling me, if your goal is to eradicate Hamas before prioritizing the saving of the hostages, they're worried that in the tactics and the way that the invasion in Gaza was carried out, they would be put in danger because the tactics are by all means necessary. And we have seen, because of the amount of civilian deaths in Gaza, the fact that there's way more than 13,000 people who've been killed, more than or nearly 6,000 children, even as early as or short as yesterday, you can tell that it's not of the most surgical of operations. So they're worried about their families. And they're also very worried, as you said, about the politics of it all. Look, Netanyahu was not popular before this happened. He's certainly not popular now. What Leo was saying too is, look, this shouldn't have never have happened. We were under the impression that we were safe. That was the one thing that we were trusting this government with, being that it is so militarized. And so there's people who are very upset that it happened in the first place. They are angry that it took this long. And today, in the announcement that came from the government of Israel, was one of the first times that I've seen those goals, those intentions, those priorities flipped, where they talked first about the hostages and then about eradicating Hamas. And that's what the families have been asking for it nonstop, even meeting with the prime minister and meeting with the government in the most recent days.
That is so interesting. Lilia, thank you very much.